Psalms 50, 53, 60, and 75. We'll get to Psalm 50 in just a moment, but I'd like to use a previous reading that we had in Psalm 105 to set up that psalm. In fact, Psalm 105, verse 6, I'd like to start there. O seed of Abraham, his servant. Abraham is mentioned 4 times throughout the entire Psalms. 3 of those 4 is in Psalm 105. And so listen to how he uses Abraham as a model for the entire story of the Old Testament. So again, O seed of Abraham, his servant, verses 8 and 9, God has remembered his covenant forever, the covenant he made with Abraham. So even 1,000 years ago, right, this is 2000 BC, he is still the rock star, the gold standard when it comes to what loyalty looks like in God's story. Genesis 12, he was called not to solve the sin problem of Genesis 3, he was called to solve the loyalty problem, the which Elohim do I worship problem that had been part of Genesis 1 through 11. Well, you get to the end of Psalm 105, the very end, and it reads this way, verse 42, For God remembered his holy promise and Abraham his servant, and he gave them the lands of the Goyim. Again, that's Hebrew for nations or peoples or Gentiles. So there's the framing story, really, of what the psalmist is trying to describe. He started in Genesis 12, and by the time we are now, again, in the days of David, they are finally experiencing the full ramifications of what it means to conquer the lands around them. So the psalmist sees the story of Abraham coming true in his own day, not just in the days of Joshua. Well, why this is important is because halfway through the Psalm 105, we get this, verse 26, God sent, notice he calls Abraham, but he sent Moses. He had a role to play. And then verse 38, Egypt was glad when they departed. So the Exodus is, of course, the defining moment of Moses. At the end of the Exodus, Exodus 24, verse 8, they have a sacrifice and they sprinkle blood on the people as though to say, prepare to meet God at Sinai. So the point is, even within Psalm 105, I think we're seeing, and I think this is accurate, the idea that within the larger framing story of Abraham comes a sub-story of Moses and sacrifice and law. This was designed to get the family to become a nation and thus experience the fulfillment of the promise of the land of the Gentiles. Okay, now let's go to Psalm 50. I'd like to read out of the Jewish Study Bible for reasons we'll see. In general, again, I'd recommend Old Testament study to read a Jewish Bible just because they know their language and they tend to be more honest about the use of words, and we'll see that coming up. So I'm in Psalm 50. I'd recommend getting it out and following this word for word. Psalm 50, verse 4 through 6. God summoned the heavens above and the earth for the trial of his people. Okay, so he's like being called to the principal's office. Bring in my devotees who made a covenant with me over sacrifice. I want to talk to you people. Then the heavens proclaimed his righteousness, for he is a God who judges. So we have a scene here where the people are being called in, and whether or not they're in trouble, let's see. By the way, this psalm has a superscription about Asaph. The Asaphites were, and they're mentioned in about a dozen psalms, and they seem to be musicians in the court of David and Solomon. So this is, again, 1,000 years after the Abraham story. All right, verse 8, Psalm 50. I censure you, not for your sacrifices and your burnt offerings made to me daily. So here are the people that God calls in, and he says, I don't censure you for your sacrifices. After all, I gave them to you. I explained them here in the Exodus, so I'm not saying that's the problem. Okay? Verses 9 through 13, what is the problem? I claim no bull from your estate, no he-goats from your pens, for mine is every animal of the forest, the beasts on 1,000 mountains. I know every bird of the mountains, the creatures of the field are subject to me. Were I hungry, I would not tell you, for mine is the world and all it holds. Do I eat the flesh of bulls, or drink the blood of he-goats? In other words, you guys are making the mistake of thinking paganly. You think that I need to eat animals, drink the blood of these animals. That's, again, how pagans thought. And God is saying, if I wanted an animal, I can just get them from anywhere I want. I own the whole world. So you're thinking wrongly about sacrifice. Well, verse 14. Sacrifice, a thank offering to God. Literally in Hebrew it reads, offer to me todah. Let me recommend another Hebrew word. Todah just means praise. In other words, you could just ignore that and simply offer todah, or praise, to, and this is important, verse 14, pay your vows or honor your promises to the Elyon. Elyon is translated Most High in most of our versions. 22 times in the Psalms, it almost always is paired with Yahweh as a name, in order to specify which Elohim. Here it is in Psalm 83:18, that they may know that you, whose name is Yahweh, is the Elyon over all the earth. So what he seems to be saying is, all right, don't worry about the sacrifice. Here's what I'm really wanting. I want you to simply offer praise to the proper Elohim, the High One, the Most High One. Again, it shows they're probably doing it to another deity. In fact, the reason I want to use the Jewish Bible specifically is because when we go to verse 16, it's the only version I found, of all the Christian versions even that I read, where the first word is important. And to the wicked, God said. Other Christian versions usually have the word but, as though he changes the audience. He's talking to the same audience in verse 16, and he says this, and to the wicked God said, who are you to recite my laws and mouth the terms of my my covenant, seeing that you spurn my discipline and brush my words aside? You're saying things, but you don't mean them. And then verse 22, mark this, you who are unmindful of God, lest I tear you apart and no one save you. The point being, he's not talking to Yahwists who are simply using sacrifice in a ritualistic way. He's talking to those who are not Yahwists, and he's ready to tear them apart for what they are doing in offering to other deities what they could simply substitute by, let's not even think about sacrifice, he's saying, because I already own all the animals I need. I simply want you to praise me. Now, why is this important? We have been moving along this trajectory for a while, I think, but here we go really in front of us, and that is this trajectory of obsolescence of the sacrificial system. It started back here officially with the Exodus and Leviticus and so forth. But by the time we've come now to Psalm 50, we have a careful, if not a really face-front description by Yahweh of his lack of need of sacrifice. Not only have they become obsolescent in the mind of God, they have become a wicked centerpiece of the religion of those who don't even follow Yahweh. So what's important to catch here, of course, is God being this clear about sacrifice. Sacrifice has never been about salvation. It never was here. It never was here. And it never will be in the future. And so we'll have people like Daniel and Ezekiel and others who will even go off into Babylon and never sacrifice again, and God will be okay with that. But that idea is clarified once again right here.